Hi everyone, my name is Megan Stoll and I am from Pursuit Advisors. I have worked with Pursuit for 3 years now and I am working currently in the capacity of Executive Assistant to Paul Pratt as CE, and I am the Internal HR Officer. In relation to my background, just very quickly, I have worked in customer service for 10 years and I left school, went straight into uni and studied HR to further my knowledge and skills in that area. So today I am joined by Abbey Gough from HR Sorted. She will help us answer a few JobKeeper questions that we have received. Abbey has answered a lot of these questions specifically about JobKeeper for us. And as a local HR consultant, she's very knowledgeable in this capacity. And we would highly recommend contacting Abbey if you are planning to act on any of the advice given throughout this session. So just a quick disclaimer here that the advice given throughout this Q&A session is for general information purposes only and is not specific to any businesses. So if you are planning to act on this information, please contact us directly or contact Abbey Gough, which her details will be at the end of the presentation, to get further advice specific to your circumstances.
Thanks very much, Megan, for having me on.
Can you start by taking us through a summary of the changes to the Fair Work Act off the back of the JobKeeper payment scheme?
Thank you very much, Megan. So basically, just before Easter, the Fair Work Act was amended to support the implementation and operation of the JobKeeper wage subsidy scheme, or the JobKeeper scheme in Australian workplaces. The new provisions apply to employers who've qualified for the JobKeeper scheme and they're eligible employees. So they're your first tests. Number one, we need to make sure that the employers that are doing these things that I'm about to talk through, that they have qualified, or that they will qualify, I suppose, and that they have eligible employees as well. So that those two are really important. So basically, once an employer has qualified, the new provisions enable some things that are, I think, quite powerful for employers to maintain their business and make sure they can continue on. And once this current situation's over and done with, they can come back quite strong. So the things they can do is employers can make temporary full and partial stand downs or request their employees or direct their employees to stand down either partially or fully. So this can basically mean reducing hours or even asking them to not come in at all. Obviously, the JobKeeper will then enable them to make sure they've got some money in their pocket. The other thing employers can do is they can temporarily alter their employees' usual duties and locations in certain circumstances. So there's tests that apply to that. And that would be things like health and safety requirements, the skills and the qualifications of the employee, etc. But there are a couple of things that they can direct. The other things that can happen is that via agreement, employers and employees can agree to altering an employee's days and times of work. And they can also agree for the employee to take annual leave, again, in certain circumstances. So all these things, there's tests around this process need to be followed. And I'd be recommending that we have a really firm, well, actually not recommending, but legally, we have to have a really firm paper trail around these pieces.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question kind of leads on from part of that answer. So we may find a number of employers who need to fully or partially reduce their employees' hours over this period. Can you talk us through a summary of how this may work?
Yes, so this, Megan, goes back to the point that I talked about before, which is one of the directions. And it's called a JobKeeper enabling stand down direction. And it's where an employer can direct the employee to work less hours and basically down to 0 hours, which is kind of what I talked about before. What needs to happen to enable that, however, so they can't just go ahead and do it. If they go ahead and do it, then they aren't following the process and they could find themselves in trouble with the Fair Work Commission. So the first thing is to make sure that the employer qualified, which I talked about before. The employee needs to kind of do a test to make sure that the employee can't be usefully employed for the normal days or the normal hours. So it can't just be, I've decided that this doesn't work for me or anything like that. There needs to be a test around usefully employed. Usefully employed is kind of at net benefit to the business, I guess. And it obviously then needs to be related to the COVID-19 pandemic or government initiatives to slow the transmission. So that's, I guess, the usefully employed section. Then basically need to make sure that the stand-down's safe, and specifically safe in regards to the nature and the spread of COVID-19. We need to make sure, of course, that the employer is becomes entitled to one or more JobKeeper payments for the employee for the period. So basically an employee is going to get that JobKeeper payment. So if an employer had, say, let's say 3 employees, 2 of them nominated for JobKeeper for this employee, and one of them didn't, then basically that employee, they couldn't, or that employee that didn't nominate for JobKeeper with this employer, they couldn't apply these rules to that 3rd employee. Now, the other things that need to be thought about is there's a wage condition, which I won't go into the specifics of, but we need to make sure we meet that. There's a minimum payment guarantee and there's an hourly rate of pay guarantee. And quickly, I guess what the hourly rate guarantee means is that an employee's usual rate of pay needs to apply. So we can't say, I've got Joe sweeping the floor within the factory because I don't have any work for him as an electrician, therefore I'm going to pay him $20 an hour as opposed to $30 an hour. We can't reduce his pay. He gets the same amount of pay times by the amount of hours he works, essentially. And then we top up with JobKeeper to the $750 if necessary. So I guess, as I said, it's really important that the JobKeeper enabling direction is necessary to maintain the employment of the employee, and it isn't unreasonable. So it needs to be not unreasonable in all of the circumstances. There's a number of tests that should apply to get to that point. Caring responsibilities is probably one of those that's necessary, the role of the employee, the impact on that employee individually. And again, it's probably one of these that there's so many steps involved, it's probably worthwhile having a chat to me anyway. But overall, making sure that it's not unreasonable for that employee in their position is really important as well. Now, as well as that, then they need to make sure that the direction is in writing and that consultation occurs. So the employer needs to consult with the employee for at least 3 days before issuing the direction or before acting on the direction, I suppose. So as I said, probably quite a detailed process, which even for the people listening might be hard to have followed through. So really worthwhile kind of either reviewing that online, there's a number of different links online, or going to me or another HR person to kind of get through those steps and to check in on the tests along the way.
Yeah, definitely. So just for everyone listening, that we do have Abbey's details on the slides that I'll show you at the end of the presentation. And otherwise, if you do have any more questions, let us know and we can pass on Abbey's details. So the next question we have, as an employer, what should I do if one of my employees doesn't want to work and instead wants to stay home and collect JobKeeper payments?
So I've heard this from a number of employers, and I'm hoping that that's more something that we're worried about than something that will happen, but certainly it's definitely worthwhile being prepared just in case. So I guess under this environment, and also under any environment really, an employer can make a lawful and reasonable direction for an employee to undertake duties. And the same applies to someone under JobKeeper. So the thing we talked about before is that they can also ask them to complete alternative duties within the skill and competence. But certainly to ask someone to complete the shifts that they've been rostered for is absolutely lawful, it's absolutely reasonable. If employees aren't attending their shifts, it comes back to the same, I think, as any normal time outside of the COVID-19 environment we're in right now. Basically, employers should notify them of their requirement to undertake the duties they've been requested to complete. We need to make sure that the employee is following policies and procedures around notification and evidence. So, if someone's not coming in for a shift, it should be because they're sick, or because they're on leave, or because they've got carers' responsibilities or something like that. And under each of them, we've got notification and evidence requirements, which we should hold them to and we should request of them. If that continues, then yeah, we might need to talk to them formally, but hopefully a reminder will lead to a different outcome. And I guess the other thing is having that informal discussion can help us understand why they're not coming in. So it might be things like family responsibilities, it might be a bit of fear, or to your point, Megan, it could be that they just want to stay home. And if that's the case, then we'll follow a process around that. But certainly having the discussion to understand where the employee is coming from, I think would be really helpful before we move too far on that one.
Yeah. Interesting one, but employers might find that they have that situation on their hands.
Hopefully not, but yes, I think it could certainly happen.
Yeah. So if they do have that on their hands, that situation, I guess this leads into the next question, that is, can I still dismiss an employee who is currently receiving JobKeeper payments?
Yeah, and I think it really goes to the response that I've provided before, which is at any point in time, you can expect your employees to follow any reasonable direction. The test is the reasonableness of it and the situation that the employee is in. So basically, if we think, if we have that discussion with them and it appears that there is a degree of laziness or they just don't want to come into work or whatever, and it's not things like fear or it's not family responsibility or anything like that, it would definitely be worthwhile sitting down and having a formal discussion with them. And it's the same as in any other time. You need to provide them 24 hours notice, the opportunity to bring a support person, you present the allegations, you give them an opportunity to present their mitigating reasons as to why this has happened and, talk through why they did it, the situation, etc. And we make a decision regarding that and provide an outcome. And obviously that's, again, a quick run through what the process might look like. But certainly, as with any time, a thorough process in line with the company policy, if one exists, definitely should be followed. And certainly, we do have the Fair Work Commission waiting to kind of jump on things where employers or employees aren't doing the right thing around JobKeeper specifically and other areas in the current COVID-19 landscape. So making sure that we do follow our processes from a legal perspective and also our internal process is important as well. But yeah, I guess the short answer is absolutely. We can dismiss people if they're not complying with reasonable directions, but definitely follow a process to get to that point. The other thing that's probably worthwhile mentioning is that there is still, as necessary, employees can still be made lawfully redundant within this period as well. So it probably depends on, again, a number of different factors, but we can look at that if an employer is looking at maybe still heading down that track.
Yeah, another interesting question. So the next one, I have heard that employers can instruct their employees to use their annual leave. Is this correct? And if so, what are the rules?
Yeah, so before I jump into it, Megan, probably what we do is we wouldn't say we can instruct, but we can request. So we can request employees to take annual leave and they can accept that request, I guess, is the short of it. The process is that the employer requests the employee take annual leave. The employee considers, and they can't unreasonably refuse the request. So that's going to be an interesting test as to the reasons they put forward as to why they may or may not refuse. And again, that's probably one to look at each case on its own merits. Again, the employer needed to have qualified for JobKeeper, and of course the employee is entitled to JobKeeper as well. The other key thing to remember is that the employee needs to always be left with an annual leave balance of 2 weeks. Okay, so we can't request anyone to take annual leave below that 2 weeks. The other thing that the new provisions enables is for employees to take annual leave at half pay. So basically we could ask them to take 4 weeks leave and actually only go into 2 weeks of their annual leave accruals. And now the annual leave accruals that apply, or when they do take annual leave under these circumstances, will still apply as though they were, let's say they're full-time, they would take annual leave at full-time, even if they're on a JobKeeper enabled stand down. So that might be hard for some people to cut through. Again, perhaps contact me if you're kind of looking at doing this and we can talk about it in a bit more detail.
Yeah. Okay, so with the annual leave, do employees continue to accrue annual leave entitlements or leave entitlements full stop based on their contracted hours or on their reduced hours?
Yeah, so this one probably in a similar line of thinking to the last question. Employees will continue to accrue based on their contract, I guess, prior to any stand downs that have been put in place. So if they're a full-time employee and they're stood down on 20 hours for 6 months, for argument's sake, they will continue over that 6 months to accrue at their full-time rate, or their full-time hours, essentially. Even if they're stood down to nothing, they will still continue to accrue as though they were a full-timer. So there's no break in employment. There's no change to their the way that leave is accrued. And the other thing that's worthwhile remembering is that the same applies to if they were to be made redundant, it's still based on their previous. So again, if they're made redundant working 20 hours because they've been stood down to 20 hours, we would still need to pay the redundancy, the number of weeks within the redundancy or the notice based on that full-time equivalent, I suppose. So yeah, it's worthwhile kind of getting into the detail of that. And I think that some of the payroll systems are having trouble with that requirement, but regardless, that's what the legal situation is.
Yeah. All right, so next question. So for JobKeeper, we know that the employees that are eligible around some other requirements, they are part-time, full-time or casual employees. So when it comes to the casuals, they have needed to work the same or regular hours for the last 12 months. Mm-hmm. If a casual employee has worked 3 hours a week for the last 12 months, will they still get the full JobKeeper payment?
Yeah. So yeah, so your first point about if they've worked 3 hours a week for the last 12 months is important, because that is what would be considered regular and systematic, which then means that they're eligible, and the employer should be, assuming the employee wants to accept JobKeeper from this employer, should be applying for that. And yeah, so the short answer is definitely the employee, if they're eligible, and the employer's put them forward. So if the employer is eligible, the employee is eligible, the employee's agreed to accept this payment or JobKeeper from that employer, then if their 3 hours a week only adds to, I don't know, $60, then they need to be topped up to $750. The important consideration is that the employer only needs to pay superannuation on the actual pay for the hours worked, not on the top-up amount. So again, there's a lot to think about. And yeah, there's a lot of different rules for employers to work through, which I think is going to come to the forefront within a short period of time. But yeah, there's your short answer to that one.
Yeah. Well, that was the last question we have, and enough, I guess that's a lot of detail. Everyone watching, you can see Abby's very knowledgeable in the HR space. So thank you, Abbey, for joining us today and answering those questions. Just a reminder to everyone else that we have Abby's details here. I'll bring them up on the screen now. So you can contact Abbey by phone on 0418 395 495, or we've got her email address here, which is abby@hrsorted.com.au. Again, just a big reminder, if you are planning on acting on any of this advice, please contact us directly or Abbey herself so we can help you through the situation, because there are a lot of variables that come into play here, and we don't want anything going wrong, especially at this time. So a final reminder, those few points, and again, thank you guys for watching. If you are struggling at this time, there are amazing organisations out there like Beyond Blue. Reach out to those organisations or to a friend or family member and just help each other get through this time. Thanks everyone, and thank you for watching.